day out there, my listeners. Welcome to Is Your Way in Your Way? And I'm your host. My name is Cassandra Crawley Mayo. And for those new listeners out there, first of all, welcome. And let me share with you what this podcast is all about. It's for those individuals who really want to move forward in their lives. They've realized that there's something else. They have some goals and some dreams that they'd like to accomplish, but they're stuck. They're not quite sure why am I stuck? Why am I stuck in this circumstances of why can't I do what I've always wanted to do? And why do I have imposter syndrome? And why am I procrastinating? And all of those things. So this is an opportunity for individuals to mitigate those self-imposed barriers that's preventing you from living your best life. And we talk about topics such as personal and business development, and also enables you to do some self-reflection. So today, our topic is perspective leads to purpose, impact, and value. And who better to talk to us about this as our special guest, Cheryl Mason. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Cassandra. It's so wonderful to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm just looking forward to the things that we're going to talk about to kind of open the doors and give more insight to the listeners out here today, and giving them an opportunity to understand their perspectives and how it can lead to their purpose, impact, and value. Oh, this is what I'm going to do, listeners. I'm going to read a little bit of Cheryl's, which we call her Sherry, background so that you can get to know her a little bit. So, first of all, she's the Honorable Cheryl L. Mason from Portsmouth, Ohio, overcame discrimination to become the first woman and military spouse to chair the Board of Veterans Appeals of the Department of Veterans Affairs. She transformed the organization by prioritizing her team and fostering innovation, achieving record-breaking results for veterans and their families. As a speaker and author of Dare to Relate, Leading with a Fierce Heart, Sherry shares her journey as a multiple suicide loss survivor and a military spouse. She holds a BA in political science and psychology from Ohio Northern University and a JD from Creighton University School of Law. Sherry actively supports veteran and military communities, focusing on leadership, transition, and suicide awareness. So I bet there's some listeners out there that perhaps are military spouses, know someone that's been in the military, and can really relate to this. Now, I'm going to ask Sherry a question because of her journey, and we would love to know where she is as of to date. So, Sherry, my question to you, there's a scale, I'm going to give you a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. And my question is, where are you on the scale to living your best life on your terms at this time in your life? From a scale of 1 to 10.
I would say I'm probably somewhere around a 7, headed towards an 8.
Okay, that's good. And I bet you there were some parts in your life or some times where you were probably a little lower on the scale.
Yeah, there were some times that I was like a 1 or a 2, or maybe a sub number, negative number.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes.
Okay. So hear this, listeners. So now we're going to talk about how does she scale up, so to speak. Like what happened, because some of you may be at a scale of 1 to 2, or some of them are 7. So let's see what Cheryl did to move her scale up, her number up, what I'd say. Now, Cheryl, what was your life like before you became an attorney? And my understanding is you were a young attorney. So what was life like before that?
Well, growing up, I grew up in Southern Ohio, which is in the foothills of Appalachia. And it's a beautiful country, area of the country, but it's a hard area of the country. And it's gotten harder in the years since. But, I lost my father at a fairly young age to suicide, and he was a veteran. And that really changed how people looked at my mother and I. They really excluded us. They would turn their backs on us.
Mm-hmm.
And they really tried to make us invisible. And so that was hard.
Yeah.
Now my mom was a World War II Rosie the Riveter type, and she went to college. She was the first to go to college, and she wouldn't allow any of that. She wouldn't accept it. And so she told me, you have to be your own person, and you have to stand and be proud of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So she really kind of taught me that. And in the community, it was the veteran and military community that came around and supported us when others kind of turned away from us. And so, and then, went to college, and I met and married my husband, who was in the Air Force, and I became a military spouse. And I really talk about it as it was really kind of going from the frying pan of the little girl from Appalachia who's trying to figure out her way into the fire of a military spouse. Because at that time, military spouses weren't supposed to work. You weren't supposed to want a career. Your job was to support your husband in the military. Mm-hmm. And the senior military spouses were very clear about that. And again, they told me I was, I couldn't have a career. Well, I was in law school. So that wasn't quite going to work. And so we figured, I figured out my path. I found people again who supported me and encouraged me. Most of them at that time were military spouses. Mm-hmm. And, since then there's been a huge turnaround in the military spouse community. And now, spouses, senior spouses, everyone supports military spouse employment and engagement. But it was hard because, I was living we spent some time in Nebraska. We lived in Germany. We lived in Virginia. And so you're moving around a lot. You're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to carve your path. And there were some times there on your scale that I was down at a 1 because I was like, what am I supposed to do? I can't find a job. I can't, connect with people. It was hard. Yeah. And so I just kept thinking, no, I have a purpose. I'm here for a reason. I know I'm meant to impact. And so I kept looking for ways to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's because being in the military, the spouses were not supposed to work. Right. So I'm very curious to what that transition was like from being that attorney, and then you transition and to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So how did you get that? And what was that transition like based on the stereotypical that the veterans or that industry I would say looked upon or didn't want you to. So that transition had to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was a hard transition, but there are people who you come across in your path, in your life, and they can really open your eyes and provide you a new perspective. And so one of those people was a colonel at the Air Force Base at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. And I went in and asked for an internship, and he said yes. He was the colonel in charge of the whole Judge Advocate General Office of the base. And he said yes, and I didn't realize that he'd been there like 2 months. And so we formed a relationship, and I worked directly with him. And I can't come to find out, he was one of the Vietnam War prisoners at the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years.
Oh, okay.
And so, but when I found that out about him, it was really eye-opening, because this man, his name's Hank Fowler. He's an amazing person. He just had this Zen quality, and he never got upset about anything. He was just Zen, and he enjoyed life, and he enjoyed, he'd come in chuckling at things. And because he was watching at that time, this was the late 80s, he was actually watching videotapes at that time of shows that were on while he had been captured. And so he found them amusing. So he'd come in telling these jokes, and I'd be like, Colonel, those are like from the 70s. And
Uh-huh.
he didn't, and so one of the things I learned from him was the importance of veterans benefits.
Okay.
And I, of course, knew that a little bit because I received some as a result of the death of my father for me to go to college, but
Right.
I didn't
Okay.
realize the impact that the benefits and services have on the veterans and their families. And Hank really taught me that and showed me that. And so when we were moving, of course, transitioning to Virginia, he said, I really think that you should apply to work at the VA. And by then I was out of law school. And
Okay.
he tried to get me to join the military, but I said, one of us,
Yeah, it's enough, right? Yeah.
and, so he recommended me. He recommended that I apply to VA, and I did, and they hired me, and as a young attorney, and it was a fit. I worked at the Board of Veterans Appeals, where I eventually became chairman many years later after some other, leaving and coming back and all that stuff. But it was a perfect fit because a lot of the cases were mental health cases. I had a degree in both political science and psychology, as well as a law school, as well as a law degree. And so, writing, it was a lot of research and writing and reviewing the files. And I found that I enjoyed it and I was good at it. And I felt like I was making an impact. I found my purpose, right?
Right.
And because I was helping people and I was giving back to the community that helped me. So, that's kind of what I did. The military spouses, kind of just got used to the fact that I was going to do what I was going to do. And we came to a happy medium with the senior spouses, as long as I didn't show up and cause a ruckus.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the senior military spouses, like I said, are a complete different perspective.
Yeah. From your tender young age, what lessons did you learn from what life presented you with?
Well, what I learned really early, and I kept learning it over and over again, was that life gives you obstacles. It does. It's challenges. There's barriers, and it's really how you perceive them. Are you going to let them put you in the corner and keep you there, or are you going to say nope? I can overcome that. I can get past that, and that's something that my mother really reinforced in me, because she said, life, she used to say this to me all the time, and I said it to my kids when I was raising them. Life is hard. It's how you decide to live it that makes a difference. And so I viewed those obstacles and challenges as, I learned to view them. It took some time, but I learned to view them as opportunities, as catalysts to propel me. What can I learn from this? What can I take away from it? I left DC as a GS-13 in the federal government, which is relatively high placed grade in attorney, and we went to Germany. And I had resigned my position because I got bad advice. And so I got to Germany and I couldn't find a job. And it was really hard. And I was depressed. And, I was also pregnant at the time. And, and it was challenging because I was like, wait a minute, I have something to offer here. I can do something. And eventually through the military spouse community, I got a job as an executive assistant. And people, my friends who were lawyers, like, that's not how the ladder works. And, at first I thought, well, they're right. But then when I took the job and I learned what I learned in that job, they weren't right. Because although it didn't present like an opportunity, it was a huge opportunity for me to learn really how to be an executive and how to manage that world. And when I came back to the States and went back to the VA and eventually began climbing the ladder, I used some of those skills I had learned.
Okay. So it sounds like, so in other words, people thought you took a demotion because you did. Yeah, that's interesting. But okay. All right. And I say because there are people that, and I can recall in my career too, where I took like a sidestep a bit, but yet it propelled me to move forward, move to the what I said, upper executive. And I did learn a lot. So I say that for my listeners because sometimes we're like, I'm not taking that because that's a lateral move. That's not what I want. But sometimes, as you indicated, based on your perspective, it may be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sometimes you have to go like you did, sideways, or like I did, a perception of moving back to go forward. But then your forward momentum is much more than you ever expected.
Yes. So how did that shape you as a leader?
Well, all along, one of the things when you're writing a book, you kind of get the chance to reflect on things. And, I often would say, where did I learn that? When you're writing the book, you figure that out. Yes. And so what I learned from my early life through my time as a military spouse, kind of dealing with those challenges, as an early military spouse, was I learned the importance and impact that people and relationships can have. And it can be negative or it can be positive. But that is a big deal. And I realized, leaders have the ability and the opportunity to really grow that and develop that and support that with their employees if they choose to. And so when I started stepping into leadership roles, I started leading with my people. I would get to know them. I mean, I didn't know their personal lives and they didn't know mine, but we knew a little bit. We knew kind of what we like to do, who had kids, who had animals, things like that. And just relating to them as people, right? And what I discovered was that all my teams that I had were successful. And people would come to me and go, how are you doing this? What's your secret? Because at the time, I was one of 10 leaders. I was a chief judge, and I had about went from a judge to a chief judge at VA. And with when I was a judge, I had about 9 or 10 people working for me. Then chief judge, when I started, I had about 50, and by the time I finished as a chief judge and moved to the next level, I had 100. But the team was successful. And people was like, how do you do that? And I'm like, it's all about relationships. And they would look at me like I lost my mind. Right? Because they said that can't be it. And I said, but it is. And so that's really the key that I learned. Now, not everybody's going to be comfortable, relating to you. And so you have to figure out different ways to connect with the people of your organization, the people you're working with. From bosses to colleagues to employees. It's a very different relationship that you have. But what I realized, and I realized this, I talk about in the book, I had an epiphany when I had a leadership assessment and was working with an executive coach, is that my style of leadership brought people something valuable because I generally related and cared for them. And they knew it. And people, all of us, no matter what we do, we all want to matter. We want to have purpose.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. And if you don't think your organization or your leader or anybody cares about you, that's going to affect you. And it can stop you in your tracks. It can send you in a different direction that you might not think, oh, I can't do that because nobody believes in me. Well, wait a minute. Stop and assess, because I just bet you that there's somebody out there that does.
Yes, exactly. Cheryl, today in leadership positions, what I'm always hearing are different generations and the challenges that they have. And I'm certain in what you were doing, you also manage different generations. They talk about the millennials and the Gen X's and how difficult, and their work ethic is different. Their character is different. They're in the technology world. How did you handle that? Or did you find that different?
Well, I think, one of the things I will say is the generations are different because they've had different exposures and different environments, but it's really about environment. Like, I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. I'm literally the tail wagging that dog, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so my perception about things, about, staying at one organization and being, and working there and doing things is much different than that of my Gen Z 24-year-old son or my millennial 29-year-old son, right? But, and I had, as a chief executive, I had boomers, I had next gens, I had Gen X, the whole range. And what I found is, yes, their environments where they came from are different.
Yes.
But the importance of that, again, goes back to relationships. What's important to them? Okay. And how do you connect to them? And then how do you help them connect to each other? So, for example, I might have a Gen Z person who is very, very good with technology, right? And can assess it. Millennials are the same way. I mean, they grew up with it. Of course, it's second nature. Me, I'm an alien. I'm a digital alien, right? But that was the thing, was having those people and understanding the perspectives and the experiences that they brought to the table, and having them connect and relate with their colleagues who have a different environment, whether they're baby boomers or Gen Xers or next gens, whatever they are, kind of expanded, because some of those more seasoned employees had their interpersonal skills were different, right? They understood certain things about how to read things. And so it was fascinating sometimes, whether you brought them together on video or whether you brought them together in person, and the conversations that would happen, like, well, how did you know this? And how did you know that? And listening to those conversations, because even in leadership, my senior executive team, most of whom I hired while I was in the position, were either boomers or next gens right behind me, right? Well, they lead very differently than the group that they're leading. Well, one thing that the pandemic, I think, taught all of us, regardless of generation, is that life is precious, and it's really that work should fulfill us and enhance our life, not dominate it.
Yes.
And that's where I think leaders are struggling with this, with the generation issue. I don't necessarily think it's a generation issue. I do think that employees have redefined personal and professional success, but all of us did that because the pandemic showed us that we had to. Right. But this transition between generations was happening all along. It just was accelerated. And so I think the biggest challenge is figuring out what's important to people. I was recently speaking with a friend, and I said, I will tell you that I think the Gen Zers and millennials have figured out some things much quicker than my generation and the generation right behind us. Right? When I get to my 40s and 50s was when I figured out, I want to do purpose. I want to do impact. What am I doing? That became more present in my brain. Yeah. It's present in their brains right now. I mean, that's what they're looking at. That's part of the reason that some of the perks and things don't grab their attention, because they're looking for fulfillment and enhancement in their purpose and impact with their job.
Okay, that's interesting. So those generations are more focused on their purpose and the impact they have. Now, because of your leadership style and what you have accomplished, what was your turnover like? Or you didn't really have big problems with turnover? Because that's something they talk about too. They don't stay in the job long. They come there, they do what they have to do, and then they're gone.
Well, I mean, so when I took the position as the chief executive, our turnover, it was federal government. The turnover rate was about 13%, which is kind of standard in the federal government, but it was a little on the high side. And so, one of the things I wanted to do was change that. And I knew the environment was changing as well. Right. And so what I saw with my leadership style and the successes that we started having as an organization in year one was that my turnover went down. right? So I went from about 13% down to, I don't know, 6 or 7%.
Wow.
And people will say, well, that was COVID. And okay, yeah, it could have been the pandemic. It could have been that. That could have contributed to it. But what I found and what the surveys, because we have in the federal government, we have surveys and all those things, were that morale and trust with the employees increased. And so they felt valued. They felt like they mattered to me and to the organization. And so they were more inclined to stay. And what I thought was fascinating is I had more than, probably had 3 or 4 that I could name off the top of my head, and there may be more than that, who left right before the pandemic.
Okay.
And they came back because they were like, we don't like that over there. We want to come back here.
Wow.
Right? We feel, so I think, they felt valued and they felt. And so, that also went for our recruitment. It helped with recruitment. But there, I think in today's world, there is a little bit more turnover because if you're not offering development and support, the grass is greener somewhere else, right? And the turnover is not always about money. And in fact, most cases with these generations, it's not. It's about impact and purpose.
That's good. That's good. Oh, so let's go to your book a bit, because I think your book may have a lot to do with what you're talking about. Why did you write the book?
Well,
let me share the name of it again so individuals are clear on the name. Dare to Relate, Leading with a Fierce Heart.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's got some people on top of an airplane. With the in the business world, it's flying the airplane while you're building it type thing. Okay. It's got some hearts on there. It's got a star in a couple places. So really, when I retired, I had several people who came to me actually right before I retired and said, what are you going to do in retirement? I'm like, I don't know. And so I haven't figured that out yet, right? I know what I think I want to do, but I'm not sure. And they said, well, we think you should write a book. And I said, about what? I said, there's a million books out there on leadership, please, Yes. And they're like, no, but your journey and your voice is important. And so, so I said, well, I'll think about it. And so I was actually a guest on a couple of podcasts, and in both those podcasts, it was the listeners and the podcast people that said to me, "You really need to write a book." and so I started listening. I really started listening to other podcasts, reading about what was going on, and it quickly became the book that I had to write because, just as we talked about, the workplace, the landscape of the workplace is changing, and the gap between leaders and employees is widening. And I was like, look, we have to figure out a way to make this better because, the Gen Zs and the millennials and the soon, the Gen Alphas who are right behind the Gen Zs, they're our future leaders. Yes. So we need to invest in them. We need to inspire them. We need to help them understand that, they can lead in their own way, shape, and form. And so it really became clear to me that, I did it my way. Yeah. and that's unique in the federal government, but it's unique anywhere. And, when 38% of our current employees don't want to take leadership jobs because they don't want to take on that, what they perceive as this really hard role, and you have to fit into this box, that's not good. So that's why I wrote the book. Okay.
Well, that's interesting because I have spoken with several leaders recently who, and it could be, what you were talking about, relationships, feeling needed. They've been inspired. They see the impact, but there are a lot of leaders that are being burnt out. So what did you do? And I'm not going to say you didn't have a time that you felt you were burned out, but what did you do to alleviate that? Or what was your I would say your deciding point to say, okay, I'm burning out, so I need to do this. This is what I need to do. So how does all of that relate into that book?
So actually, I did, especially when you're new in a chief executive role, you want to take on everything, you want to do everything, you think you have to be there all the time and do things. And I did those things. Right. And it was a lot. And I had a lot going on in my personal life at the time. One son graduated from high school, another one graduated from college. My mom was diagnosed with late stage Alzheimer's. There was a lot.
Yes.
And, and sometimes I found myself hiding in my work, and I knew that's what I was doing.
Okay.
And I knew I shouldn't be doing that. And so, I had started really putting boundaries in, kind of taking some time. One of the things I learned with business trips is my viewpoint as a chief executive is, just get there and get back as quickly as you can, because you have stuff going on. Well, right. Exactly. I was like, wait a minute, I can't fly all the way out to the West Coast from the East Coast and take a red eye back and
exactly
who I am the next morning. It's just not going to work. So I started building in some buffers there, here and there. And actually what it did for me is it allowed me to engage more with our customers and stakeholders, which was a bonus, right? Yes. So I got feedback that I could bring back. But that also helped me in that I got the feedback that, your leadership is changing things. So that was, it was a two-pronged effect. But the other thing is I took some downtime here and there. And every leader is different on how you use your downtime, how you switch off, right? Yes. For me, I have ADHD. You can probably tell. But I have ADHD, and I didn't discover this until much later in life when one of my sons was diagnosed. And so what I have to do is my downtime is shorter sometimes than other people's. And so the perception is that I wasn't taking enough, or I wasn't taking enough downtime, but I was for me. Right. Okay. But then talking about that. So one of the things I love to do is I love to take walks. I like to walk the dog. I like to walk out in nature. And so I would do that. I would have a Friday afternoon or a Saturday and just go, occasionally I like to play golf. I didn't get to do a lot of that in my role, but occasionally my husband and I would sneak out for 9 holes on a Friday evening or something. Okay. And just take that time and do that. Right. Okay. Because it's that resilience that you're building up, and you have to have something like that you do. And so, and then we went into pandemic. All right. And so what happened? I was available all the time on my computer. Yeah. And so people were scheduling meetings back to back to back to back. Exactly. Look, we got to slow this roll right here. Right. Okay. And so, again, I had to, because I could feel it. Right. And it was actually my husband and my son had come home. My youngest was home from college, and he's like, Mom, how can you be in back-to-back meetings for 6 hours? What are you doing? Right. You come out of the office and you're days. Yeah. And I said, you're right. And so I really started buffering that. I started, taking time. I wasn't leaning on my team like I should have been. And part of that was because we were just building the new leadership team, and I had to learn to trust them and build them, and rely on them, because that's the other way you can build your resilience. When you trust your team and they've got it, you're okay. Yeah,
exactly.
Right? So that's the other side of it. So
that's good. That's good. That's good advice, because I used to say, remember, guys, we're human beings, not human machines.
That's right.
We just keep going and going and going, and just have no energy. Yeah, that's so true. One of the things you said is, no matter what, we have a purpose. And because of the relationships that you've had with your employees, do you all ever talk about their purpose or what their purpose is? Do they ever come or wonder what that is? And if so, how did you handle that?
It was really interesting because, I had come up in the organization, right? So I had been in the organization about 20 years, a little over 20 years when I was nominated and selected to be the chairman. And so I walked out the door as an executive a senior executive. I walked back in the door an hour later as the chairman. Well, all of a sudden, people looked at me like I'd grown two heads, right? They weren't sure if they could talk to me, and they weren't sure how they approached me. Well, one of the things that I had done throughout my career as a leader was I had really hired and recruited a lot of military spouses to work at our organization because we're veterans, but particularly military spouses, because we know, we understand, we see it, we see that world. And so some of them were used to coming to me for advice and asking me questions. And all of a sudden it was like, we can't do that because she's too busy. And I'm like, whoa, Nellie, let's stop here. Let's think about that. And so one of the things I did was I basically set up office hours. And when we were in person, I walked around, right, and chatted with people.
Yes.
And sometimes people would stop me in the hall and just say, hey, can we chat a minute? I'd like to get your perspective on this. Or, and occasionally it would be like, I'm not sure, if I'm supposed to stay in this job. I have this opportunity over here. And, and people would say, I can't believe you told the boss that. Right. And they're like, but she understands.
Yes.
Right? And so, I tried to continue that as much as I could. I mean, I couldn't, but I couldn't do it for everybody all the time. But I said, look, I will carve out time for you if you need something. And so occasionally people would come. In fact, I still have people who reach out to me from the organization and from a couple other organizations, because I kind of encourage people to kind of spread their wings sometimes and explore other opportunities that, and they'll call and they'll say, hey, do you have a few minutes that I can bounce something off of you to see if it makes sense?
Right. That has a lot to do with your leadership style. You were open and you were, what I say, approachable. There's some leaders that aren't approachable, and they're not quite sure why. And the visibility that you provide, I think, is also important. So they felt that they could come close to you. So we talked about your journey, and this podcast is actually about, moving forward, individuals that know that there's something that they want to do different. They have these dreams, but it's kind of like they'll stay in those positions where they are, and it's something about it that they don't want to move forward. Is there anything you could share with them, probably more about perspective, that would help them or propel them to pivot and start doing what it is that they want to do? I'm thinking if they have this thought and this dream and this is their goal, I think personally it's not given to them for nothing. There's a reason why that's given to them. What words of advice could you provide them with that will help them get off the stool, so to speak, and move forward?
Well, I think one of the things that happens to all of us is we get comfortable, right? This is easy. We kind of know how things work. We have the routine. We're in our comfort zone. And, when you're in your comfort zone, it feels great. It's wonderful.
Yes.
But are you growing? Are you doing what you're meant to do? Are you thinking about that? And if there's something out there, I mean, I'm kind of going through a little bit of that like right now. I went, I wrote the book and kind of paused a little bit. And, now I'm trying to launch a little bit speaking from the book and launch the speaking career, because I really think it's where I need to be.
Yes.
But, it requires me getting out of my comfort zone and talking to different people and doing presentations and, doing some things virtually and writing some articles and doing all those things that, people are like, oh yeah, but you did things like that. Well, I did some things like that in the role that I was in.
Yes.
But that wasn't me, myself, and I. Right?
Yes.
So now I'm me, myself, and I. So the question is, what am I here for? What am I meant to be doing? And, people will say to me all the time, well, I thought you retired. And I'm like, I did retire from a full-time 50-hour-a-week job plus, right? But I'm not like hiding out in my house. I'm going to go do stuff. I still want to impact, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's the question is, okay, I could sit on my lovely back porch with, the veranda style and, enjoy life. But, and occasionally I like to do that. But sometimes I'm like, you need to go upstairs to your office and you need to write an article, or you need to get on a podcast, or you need to go talk to someone at it, or, so get out of your comfort zone. Right. Think about what you're doing to kind of push yourself in a way that explores, kind of allows you to still be in your comfort zone a little bit, but explore those other areas while you're doing that. And see how that makes you feel. I mean, I when I was writing the book, I met and interviewed a lot of people, and one young man I spoke to, he said, I was in this job as a financial planner, and, it was great. I made a lot of money, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And he said, after a while, I just couldn't stay there. I had to go do, and, now he's a speaker and he's out doing and speaking about different things and engaging with people, because that's what he wanted to do. Right. And he's like, my parents think I'm crazy. Okay. I mean, my youngest is a golf pro, right? My dogs are barking. My
dogs are talking to each other.
Yeah. My youngest is a golf pro. And so, he went to college and said, hey, I think I want to teach golf. I said, okay.
Wow.
You can make money at it. I mean, that's, I think people need to do what they feel they need to do, right? What makes them happy.
Right.
My oldest is an engineer. He likes to do engineering things, he's a mechanical, but he also likes to play games on the computer. He's a gamer.
Right.
So he does things that support his world.
Right. Okay. So it's like, if you don't get out of your comfort zone, it's like you're in your way. I mean, that's kind of what this podcast is all about. And my book is Your Way in Your Way, and something to think about. And also, Sherry, when I listened to you, you didn't do everything. You didn't do it alone. And I always tell my listeners, reach out to your circle of influence or individuals that you're comfortable with, or someone who knows more than you to give you some advice, because because one of the things you talk about is being invisible is not an option. Yeah, that's right. So I definitely wanted to find that out from you, and want my listeners to understand that they cannot do it alone, and it's okay. And I think it gives you a reason for living, when you're doing what it is that you're called to do. Go ahead.
If you let life happen, and you just there's things blocking me, there's obstacles, I can't do that, I could never do that, I can't, then you're letting life and others choose your path. And I believe that we are here for a purpose, we are here for an impact, and we were given brains and opportunities to do things. And so life will try to make you invisible if you let it. And sometimes other people will too, especially if they're threatened by whatever you're doing, or they're uncomfortable, right? And so I think in that situation, you have to understand that invisibility is not an option, that you need to be out there doing things, checking different ways, exploring different opportunities, and seeing what works for you, what you enjoy doing, and I think, like I will say, in my generation, generally, we all waited till we retired to do that.
Yes.
Right? And I've just given you a couple of examples of people from Gen Z and millennials. They're not waiting for retirement to do that. They're doing that, right? And so I think when you're out there and you're doing things, that you're engaged and encouraged, and then you do more. So you're not invisible. But the other piece of that, the invisibility piece, is finding your tribe, finding your network, finding the people that that support you, that advise you, that encourage you. That's extremely important. And it can be, it can be a multitude of different people.
That's right. That's exactly right. Sherry, how, let me ask you this before we wrap up. Where do you get your inspiration from?
My inspiration for a long time, and still to a certain extent, is and was my mom. I lost her in 2018, but she overcame so much. She was the last of her parents' children. Both of her parents had passed by the time she was 10. She was passed around to family. She was basically an orphan. She was passed around to her siblings. She carved her path. And, she did Rosie the Riveter things at Wright Field. And then she went on to college and met and married my father. And then, life got hard again with his death. And she became a widow. And the sole breadwinner of the house.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of challenges just watching her, because she was so inspirational, because she just would not accept that life could be difficult. Right. And, she knew it was difficult, but she wasn't accepting that she wasn't supposed to go and do. Right. And so she did. And so that was, she was and is continues to be my inspiration. But, I find inspiration all around me. I mean, just yesterday I posted, I live in Pinehurst now, North Carolina. And so we've got a little thing called the U.S. Open golf tournament happening here this week. And, I enjoy golf. I get to play occasionally. And watching the golfers come in, and, the airport's near our house. We got all these planes landing, the excitement, you can feel the excitement. Yeah. But then watching them during the practice rounds, and their persistence, and they just keep going, and they just, and that to me is inspiring, because they're practicing their craft. They're doing what they enjoy doing. Yeah. And that is kind of, I'm like, well, okay, that was my Monday inspirational message on LinkedIn, because I thought that's really what I need. I need to go back upstairs and work on my speech some more, and figure out some ways to get my voice out there, because that's inspirational for me. But I find inspiration in nature too. I mean, I think you can find inspiration all around you. It just depends on what your perspective is and what you're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah. And just listening to you take action. You can think about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but you have to act upon it.
You do.
Yeah. So when we opened up, you said you were about a 7 on the scale, 1 to 10. So now you're at a point, exactly what it is that you want to do. What can you think get you to that solid 8 or almost to that 9?
I think once I start getting engaged as a speaker a little bit more, there's a couple of possibilities on the horizon, but I'm new at this. I'm learning. Right. And it's a new area for me. This is way outside my comfort zone, right? Yes. Right. And I spoke a lot in the previous role I had, but that was in the role, right? This is me. This is me talking about what I want. So I think getting those engagements, getting people who are telling me, yes, this makes sense. We want to hear this. This is good. And then booking me and figuring out how I do that. I think, I think that will kind of push me. And that just takes time. It just takes time and networking and letting people know that you're out there and you're available to speak at conferences and leadership trainings and different things.
Exactly. So listeners, you heard our conversation today, Cheryl and I, and Sherry and I, and if you notice that she's moving up the scale, but however, she's doing what it is, she's identified what it is that she would like to do, and she's moving towards that, and she's taking steps. So I say that because I think about it again, what your goals are, your dreams are, and move in that direction and listen and replay this podcast. You can hear the things that Sherry talked about and you can kind of align that within your organization, even if you want to be promoted, you want to become a leader. Listen to how she became so effective as a leader, and how employees left because they thought the grass was green on the other side, and they came back. So look at that, her turnover rate. I mean, it's incredible. 113%, then it went to 6. So it's something to say about her accomplishments. And what I didn't share with you, she's a TEDx speaker. So she's done a really phenomenal job, and based on which it is that she wanted, in spite of what happened in her childhood, she still has overcome that and still moving forward to do what I believe God has ordained her to do. Sure. Tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you.
So you can get in touch with me a couple of different ways. You can always follow me on LinkedIn. It's Sherry parentheses Cheryl Mason, and then also on my website, which is www.catalyst CATALYST leadership LEADERSHIP and it's MGMT. It's not management spelled out. It's MGMT.com.
Okay. Well, Sherry, it was a pleasure. Thanks again. And my listeners, as I always say, bye for now. And remember to share this podcast, and also know that this podcast will be on all platforms, and it will go live on my platforms the first week in August, or maybe before. So God bless you again, Sherry. Thank you so much. I so appreciate being a guest.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye for now.